It was just another Friday evening at Chicago O'Hare Airport. The security checkpoint was packed with travelers rushing to catch their flights. Some were business people in suits, others were families with kids, and a few college students with backpacks were scattered throughout the crowd. Everyone seemed tired and ready to get home for the weekend. Among these travelers was Maya Richardson, a 32-year-old woman who worked as a safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. She had spent the entire day inspecting aircraft and checking maintenance records at one of the airline hangars. It was routine work, but important work. Maya took her job seriously because she knew that lives depended on the safety checks she performed. Maya was dressed in her usual work clothes, a navy blue blazer with matching pants and a crisp white shirt. Her briefcase was in one hand, and her FAA identification badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. She had done this 1,000 times before. Walk through security, show her credentials, and head to her gate. Simple and straightforward, but today would be different. As Maya approached the security line, she noticed an officer watching her. His name tag read Hartman, and he wore the standard airport security uniform. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with graying hair and a stern expression that seemed permanently fixed on his face. There was something about the way he was looking at her that made Maya feel uncomfortable. It wasn't the usual professional observation that security officers give everyone. This felt different. This felt personal. Maya tried to shake off the feeling and continued toward the metal detector. She placed her briefcase and shoes in the plastic bins like everyone else. She removed her blazer and put it through the scanner. As she walked through the metal detector, it didn't beep. Everything was fine. She should have been able to collect her things and move on, but Officer Hartman had other plans. "You. Step aside," he said, pointing directly at Maya. His voice was sharp and commanding. Maya looked around confused. Several other passengers had just walked through without any issues. She wondered what could possibly be wrong. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked politely. She was used to dealing with authority figures in her line of work and always maintained a professional demeanor. "I said step aside," Hartman repeated, his tone even more aggressive this time. He didn't explain why. He didn't ask her any questions. He just stared at her with an expression that Maya recognized all too well. She had seen that look before in her life, more times than she cared to remember. Maya complied and stepped to the side. Other passengers were now staring. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, and a few were already reaching for their phones. In today's world, everything gets recorded. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Hartman demanded, even though Maya's FAA badge was clearly visible hanging around her neck. "My identification is right here, officer," Maya said calmly, lifting the badge so he could see it more clearly. "I'm an FAA inspector. I was here on official business conducting aircraft safety inspections." Hartman barely glanced at the badge. "That could be fake," he said dismissively. "I need to see a driver's license or passport." Maya felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her composure. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out her wallet, showing him both her driver's license and her federal government identification card. Both had her photo, both were clearly legitimate, and both confirmed exactly what she had told him. "These could be fake too," Hartman said, though he hadn't really examined them carefully. "What were you really doing in that hangar area?" "I just explained that to you, officer," Maya replied, her voice still calm but with a hint of frustration creeping in. "I'm a federal safety inspector. I was performing routine aircraft inspections. I do this several times a week." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Other passengers had collected their belongings but weren't moving on. They sensed something was wrong. A few people had their phones up, recording the interaction. An elderly white woman whispered to her husband, "Why is he giving her such a hard time? She's clearly showed him everything." Hartman noticed the phones. Instead of backing down, he seemed to become more agitated. "Put those phones away," he shouted at the crowd. Nobody moved. If anything, more phones came out. "Officer, I've shown you my credentials," Maya said, trying once more to reason with him. "I've cooperated fully with your requests. Is there something specific you need from me?" "Because I have a flight to catch." "That's when everything went wrong. Don't you talk back to me," Hartman shouted, his face turning red. Before Maya could react, he grabbed her arm roughly and twisted it behind her back. The sudden movement was so forceful that Maya gasped in pain. "You're hurting me," Maya cried out. "What are you doing?" "I haven't done anything wrong." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several people started shouting at Hartman to stop. She didn't do anything, someone yelled. Let her go, shouted another voice. But Hartman didn't listen. He forced Maya toward the wall, pushing her face first against the cold concrete. Her briefcase fell to the ground, spilling some of its contents across the floor. Her FAA badge fell off the lanyard and skittered away. Maya tried to explain again that she was a federal employee, that she had done nothing wrong, that she had cooperated with every request. But Hartman wasn't listening to words anymore. He pulled out handcuffs and roughly secured them around Maya's wrists. The metal dug into her skin painfully. Maya felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Stop resisting, Hartman shouted, even though Maya was standing completely still. She wasn't resisting. She hadn't resisted. The whole crowd could see it. The videos would later prove it, but Hartman was creating his own narrative. As he marched Maya away from the security checkpoint, she heard him mutter something under his breath. The words were quiet, meant only for her ears, but they were ugly words. Words that confirmed exactly what Maya had suspected from the beginning. This wasn't about security. This wasn't about safety. This was about the color of her skin. Maya was taken to a small detention room in the bowels of the airport. The room was windowless and cold, with just a metal table and 2 chairs. Hartman left her handcuffed in that room for nearly 2 hours. No explanation, no charges, no phone call. Just sitting alone in handcuffs, her shoulder throbbing from where Hartman had twisted her arm, her wrists burning from the too tight metal cuffs. Finally, a different officer came in. This one was younger and looked uncomfortable. He unlocked the handcuffs and told Maya she was free to go. No apology, no explanation, just that she could leave. Maya gathered what dignity she had left and walked out. She missed her flight. Her shoulder hurt. Her wrists were bruised, but worse than all of that was the feeling of humiliation and anger burning in her chest. She had done everything right. She had cooperated. She had shown her credentials. And still, she had been treated like a criminal. As Maya left the airport that night, she made a decision. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. This wasn't going to be forgotten. What happened to her was wrong, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. Maya sat in her car in the airport parking garage for almost 20 minutes before she could bring herself to drive home. Her hands were shaking, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Officer Hartman's face again. She saw the hatred in his eyes. She felt his hands grabbing her arm, slamming her against that wall. Her shoulder throbbed with every movement. Finally, she pulled out her phone. The first call was to her husband, David. He answered on the second ring. Hey, honey. I was starting to worry. Your flight should have landed by now, David said, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. Maya tried to speak, but her voice cracked. The tears she had been holding back for hours finally came pouring out. Maya, what's wrong? What happened? David's voice immediately shifted from cheerful to alarmed. Through her tears, Maya told him everything. David listened in stunned silence, his own anger building with every detail. By the time she finished, he was furious. I'm calling a lawyer right now, David said firmly. This is assault. This is discrimination. That officer can't just do this to people. I know, Maya whispered. But David, I'm an FAA inspector. I'm a federal employee. If he did this to me with my credentials and my position, what is he doing to regular people? How many others has he hurt? That question would haunt Maya for the days to come. When Maya finally drove home, David was waiting by the door. He pulled her into a gentle hug, careful of her injured shoulder. Their 2 kids, 10-year-old Jasmine and 7-year-old Tyler, came running down the stairs but stopped when they saw their mother's face. Even at their young ages, they could tell something was very wrong. Mom, why are you crying? Tyler asked, his little face scrunched up with worry. Maya knelt down, wincing at the pain in her shoulder, and pulled both children close. Mommy had a difficult day at work, baby. But I'm okay now that I'm home with you guys. That night, after the kids were in bed, Maya and David sat at the kitchen table with Maya's laptop. She logged into her work email and sent a detailed report to her supervisor, Director James Chen. She documented everything that had happened, noting exact times, descriptions of Officer Hartman's behavior, and the names of witnesses she had managed to collect before leaving the airport. She also did something else. She searched social media. What she found made her gasp. The videos were already online. Multiple videos from different angles, all showing the same horrifying scene. Maya watched herself being grabbed, slammed against the wall, handcuffed. She watched herself remain calm and cooperative even as Hartman became more aggressive. The videos didn't lie. They showed exactly what had happened. One video already had over 50,000 views. The comments were flooding in. "This is disgusting," one person wrote. "She clearly showed him her badge," said another. "This is why we need reform," commented a third. But there were other comments too, ugly ones that Maya couldn't bring herself to read. "It's going viral," David said quietly, looking over her shoulder at the screen. "People are paying attention." Maya nodded slowly. Part of her felt exposed and vulnerable, knowing that millions of strangers were watching the worst moment of her life. But another part of her felt relieved. There was proof. There were witnesses. This wasn't just her word against Hartman's. By morning, Maya's phone was ringing constantly. News reporters wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations were reaching out. Her own colleagues from the FAA were calling to express their support and outrage. Director Chen called personally at 7 in the morning. "Maya, I've seen the videos," Chen said, his voice tight with anger. "I've already contacted our legal department and the Inspector General's office. What happened to you is completely unacceptable. You were there on official federal business and you were assaulted. We're going to support you 100%. "Thank you, Director," Maya replied. Her voice was hoarse from crying, and she was exhausted from barely sleeping. "I want you to take the next week off," Chen continued. "Paid leave. You need time to recover and figure out your next steps. And Maya, I want you to know that the entire FAA has your back on this." That same morning, the airport authority released a statement. Maya read it on her phone while drinking her coffee, and with each word her anger grew. The statement claimed that Officer Hartman had responded appropriately to a security situation. It said that the individual in question had been acting suspiciously and had failed to comply with security protocols. It made no mention of Maya's credentials, her federal position, or the clear evidence in the video showing her complete cooperation. "They're protecting him," Maya said to David, showing him the statement. "They're lying." "Not for long," David replied. He had already been in touch with several lawyers that morning. "I've got 3 attorneys who want to talk to you. All of them specialize in civil rights cases." One of those attorneys was Sharon Davis, a woman with a reputation for taking on powerful institutions and winning. Sharon had successfully sued police departments, government agencies, and major corporations. She didn't lose often, and she didn't back down from difficult fights. Sharon called Maya that afternoon. Her voice was strong and confident, but also warm and understanding. "Maya, I've watched the videos at least 10 times, Sharon said. "What happened to you was wrong on every level. It was assault, it was discrimination, and it was a clear violation of your civil rights. But I need you to know something before we go any further. If we take this case, it's going to be hard. They're going to try to dig into your life. They're going to look for anything they can use against you. The media attention will be intense. Are you prepared for that?" Maya thought about it for a moment. She thought about her kids, about her job, about her privacy. But then she thought about Officer Hartman still working at that airport, still stopping passengers, still targeting people who looked like her. "I'm prepared," Maya said firmly. "If he did this to me, a federal inspector with credentials and a badge, what is he doing to people who don't have those things? People who are just trying to travel to see their families or go on vacation? Someone has to stop him." "Then let's do this," Sharon replied. "I'm taking your case." Over the next few days, Maya went to the doctor to document her injuries. The doctor found bruising on both wrists from the handcuffs, a sprained shoulder from when Hartman had twisted her arm, and signs of acute stress and trauma. Every injury was photographed, measured, and noted in her medical records. Maya also started seeing a therapist. She didn't want to admit it at first, but the incident had affected her more deeply than she realized. She was having trouble sleeping. Every time she heard a loud noise, she jumped. She kept replaying the moment Hartman grabbed her over and over in her mind. "What you're experiencing is normal," her therapist explained gently. "You went through a traumatic event. Your sense of safety was violated. It's okay to need help processing this." Meanwhile, the videos continued to spread online. The hashtag Justice for Maya started trending. Civil rights groups organized protests outside the airport. Travelers began sharing their own stories of being mistreated by airport security, and a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the complaints involved Officer Hartman. Sharon's legal team started digging into Hartman's background, and what they found was shocking. Over the course of 8 years, 17 complaints had been filed against him. 17. Most of them involved travelers of color who claimed they had been singled out, harassed, or treated roughly. But nothing had ever been done about it. Hartman had never been fired, never been seriously disciplined. He had taken some training courses and served a few brief suspensions, but he always came back to work. They knew, Maya said when Sharon told her what they had found. The airport knew he was doing this and they let him keep his job anyway. That's what we're going to prove, Sharon replied. And that's why this case is so important. It's not just about what happened to you. It's about a system that allowed this to happen again and again. The airport tried to control the narrative. They released another statement saying that they took all complaints seriously and that the matter was under investigation. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Too many people had seen the videos. Too many people had heard similar stories. A week after the incident, Maya received a letter. It was from the airport authority, informing her that Officer Hartman had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of wrongdoing. It was just a notification. Administrative leave means he's still getting paid, David pointed out, reading over Maya's shoulder. He assaulted you and he's sitting at home collecting a paycheck. Maya folded the letter carefully and placed it in the growing file of documents related to her case. She knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. Sharon Davis didn't waste any time. Within 2 weeks of taking Maya's case, her legal team had transformed her office into what looked like a war room. One entire wall was covered with printed screenshots from the viral videos, each frame numbered and analyzed. Another wall had a timeline of events, starting from the moment Maya entered the security checkpoint to when she was finally released from detention. But the most disturbing wall was the one dedicated to Officer Hartman's history. Maya stood in Sharon's office staring at that wall. There were 17 complaint files pinned up, each one representing a person who had suffered at Hartman's hands. Sharon's team had managed to track down and interview 12 of those complainants. Their stories were heartbreaking. "This is Rita Okafor," Sharon said, pointing to one file. "She's a Nigerian immigrant, a nurse. Hartman detained her for 3 hours because he claimed her accent made him suspicious. She missed her shift at the hospital and nearly lost her job." Sharon moved to another file. "This is Carlos Mendez, a high school teacher from Texas. Hartman accused him of carrying illegal substances. Searched his bag so roughly that he broke Carlos's laptop. No drugs were found, of course. Carlos filed a complaint and nothing happened." Maya felt sick as she listened to story after story. Each person was different, but the pattern was unmistakable. They were all people of color. They had all been treated roughly. They had all filed complaints that went nowhere. Why wasn't he stopped? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because the system protected him," Sharon replied bluntly. "We've subpoenaed internal documents from the airport authority. Want to know what we found? Emails from supervisors dismissing complaints as passengers being oversensitive. Performance reviews that praised Hartman for being thorough and vigilant. He even got a commendation 2 years ago for his dedication to security." "That's insane," Maya said, shaking her head in disbelief. "It gets worse," Sharon continued. She pulled out a thick folder. 3 of these complaints resulted in lawsuits. Small ones settled quietly out of court. The airport paid the victims to go away and make them sign confidentiality agreements. So nobody ever knew that Hartman was a repeat offender. Maya sat down heavily in one of Sharon's office chairs. "How much did they pay to keep this quiet? Total? About $200,000 over 5 years, Sharon said. They could have fired him. They could have retrained him properly. They could have done something meaningful. Instead, they just paid people to stay silent and let him keep terrorizing passengers. This information would become crucial to their case. It wasn't just about one bad officer anymore. It was about an entire system that enabled him, protected him, and allowed him to continue hurting people." Meanwhile, the FAA was conducting its own investigation. Director Chen had assigned a team of investigators to review what had happened to Maya. Their findings were damning for the airport authority. Chen called Maya personally to share the results. "Maya, according to our investigation, you were at that airport on official federal business. You had proper credentials clearly displayed. You posed no security threat whatsoever. The treatment you received was not only inappropriate, but potentially interfered with federal operations." "What does that mean?" Maya asked. It means the FAA is prepared to file a formal complaint against the airport authority, Chen explained. We're also recommending a review of their security protocols and training procedures. What happened to you cannot happen to any federal employee conducting official business. This was bigger than Maya had imagined. Her case was now attracting attention from multiple federal agencies. The Department of Justice had even sent investigators to look into whether Hartman's actions constituted a pattern of civil rights violations. But the airport authority wasn't backing down. They hired one of the most expensive law firms in Chicago to defend them. Their strategy became clear quickly: discredit Maya, justify Hartman's actions, and minimize the whole incident. The defense team started by requesting Maya's complete employment records, her social media history, her financial records, even her college transcripts. They were looking for anything they could use against her. This is standard, Sharon explained to Maya during one of their meetings. They're trying to find something, anything that makes you look bad. A controversial social media post, a bad performance review, a late payment on a credit card. They want to shift the focus from what Hartman did to who you are. But they won't find anything, Maya said confidently. I've lived my life with integrity. I know, Sharon smiled. That's what makes their strategy so desperate. But I need to prepare you for what's coming. They're going to depose you. That means their lawyers will question you for hours, trying to trip you up, trying to make you angry or confused. They'll ask about your childhood, your education, your marriage, your work history. They'll ask the same questions 10 different ways. Maya took a deep breath. I can handle it. The deposition took place in a conference room at the defense firm's downtown office. Maya sat across from 3 lawyers with Sharon beside her and a court reporter recording every word. For 6 hours, they questioned her about every aspect of her life and career. Ms. Richardson, have you ever been disciplined at work? One lawyer asked. No, Maya answered calmly. Never received a warning or a negative review? Never. Have you ever had any conflicts with law enforcement before this incident? No. Have you ever been arrested? No. Have you ever filed complaints against police officers or security personnel? No. This was the first time I ever experienced anything like this. The lawyers tried every angle. They asked if she had been tired that day, implying she might have been uncooperative without realizing it. They asked about her tone of voice, suggesting she might have sounded aggressive. They even asked if she was having marital problems, hinting that she might have been emotionally unstable. Sharon objected to many of the questions, and Maya remained composed throughout. She told the truth, she stayed calm, and she didn't let them rattle her. But the defense's next move was more troubling. They subpoenaed the 12 other complainants that Sharon's team had interviewed. They wanted to question each of them, looking for inconsistencies in their stories, trying to find reasons why their complaints shouldn't be believed. Rita Okafor, the nurse from Nigeria, was terrified. She called Sharon's office in tears. I can't do this, Rita said. I have to work, I have children. I can't afford to take time off for depositions and court appearances. I'm sorry, but I can't help. Sharon understood. Not everyone could afford to fight. Not everyone had the resources or the emotional strength to stand up against a powerful institution. But Maya did, and she was determined to see this through. The legal team also obtained the airport surveillance footage. For the first time, they saw the complete picture from multiple camera angles. The footage showed Maya approaching security, cooperating fully, and then being grabbed and assaulted by Hartman. But it also showed something else that made Sharon's eyes widen. Look at this, Sharon said, calling Maya into her office. She played the surveillance video, pausing it at a specific moment. See that supervisor in the background? He's watching the whole thing. He sees Hartman grab you. He sees the confrontation, and he does nothing. He just stands there. He witnessed it and didn't intervene, Maya asked, shocked. Not only that, Sharon continued, but look at this email we found in Discovery. She pulled up a document on her computer. 2 hours after the incident, that same supervisor sent an email to his boss defending Hartman's actions. He called you uncooperative and said Hartman responded appropriately to a potential security threat. Maya felt her anger rising. It was bad enough that Hartman had assaulted her. But knowing that his supervisor had watched it happen and then lied about it afterward made everything worse. The investigation also uncovered something that would prove crucial to the case. In Hartman's personnel file, there was a psychological evaluation from 6 years ago. The evaluator had noted concerns about Hartman's attitudes towards certain groups and recommended additional bias training. That recommendation had been ignored. They knew he had issues, Sharon said, highlighting the relevant passages in the evaluation. They had a professional psychologist tell them that Hartman needed help, and they did nothing. That's negligence. That's liability. As the case built momentum, the media coverage intensified. Major news networks picked up the story. Maya was invited to appear on national television programs. At first, she was hesitant. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted justice. But Sharon convinced her that sharing her story was important. Every time you speak publicly, you make it harder for them to dismiss this case. You put pressure on them, and you give hope to all those other people who've been treated badly, but were too afraid to speak up. So Maya agreed to do an interview with a respected news journalist. She sat in the television studio, the bright lights making her nervous, and told her story to millions of viewers. "I'm not just fighting for myself," Maya said during the interview, her voice steady and clear. "I'm fighting for every person who's been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. I'm fighting for every traveler who's been humiliated at a security checkpoint. And I'm fighting to make sure that officers like Hartman can't keep hurting people." The interview went viral. The hashtag Justice for Maya started trending again. Public pressure on the airport authority reached a breaking point. The lawsuit was officially filed on a cold Monday morning in February. Sharon stood on the steps of the federal courthouse with Maya beside her, facing a crowd of reporters and cameras. The lawsuit named Officer Hartman, the airport authority, the private security company that employed him, and the city itself. The amount they were seeking was $15 million. "This lawsuit is about accountability," Sharon announced to the assembled media. "It's about a system that failed to protect travelers and failed to stop an officer with a documented history of abuse. My client Maya Richardson is a dedicated public servant who was assaulted simply for existing while black in an airport." Maya stepped up to the microphone next. She had practiced what she wanted to say, but now that the moment was here, she spoke from her heart instead. "I'm a mother, a wife, and a federal employee who takes pride in keeping air travel safe," Maya said, her voice clear despite her nervousness. "What happened to me should never happen to anyone. I had every credential, every form of identification, and I cooperated fully. But none of that mattered to Officer Hartman. The only thing he saw was my skin color. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. That's why I'm standing here today. That's why I'm fighting back." The questions from reporters came fast. How did she feel? What did she want to happen to Hartman? Did she think she would win? Maya answered each question with grace and honesty. Yes, she was still traumatized by what happened. Yes, she believed Hartman should be fired and face criminal charges. And yes, she was confident that justice would prevail because the evidence was overwhelming. The defense team responded to the lawsuit with a motion to dismiss, claiming that Hartman had qualified immunity as a security officer, and that the airport authority couldn't be held responsible for the split-second decisions of its employees. They also argued that Maya hadn't suffered significant damages, and that the whole incident was being blown out of proportion by the media. Sharon's response was swift and devastating. She filed a brief that was over 100 pages long, filled with evidence, case law, and expert testimony. She included stills from the videos showing Maya's cooperative behavior and Hartman's aggressive actions. She included the medical reports documenting Maya's injuries. She included the 17 previous complaints against Hartman and the emails showing that supervisors had ignored them. But the most powerful part of Sharon's brief was the testimony from other victims. Despite their fear, 3 of the people who had filed complaints against Hartman agreed to provide sworn statements for the case. Their stories painted a picture of a man who had been allowed to abuse his authority for years. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. The case would go forward. As the pretrial process continued, both sides took depositions from key witnesses. Sharon deposed Officer Hartman himself, and the video of that deposition would later become infamous in legal circles. Hartman sat across from Sharon, his lawyer beside him, looking confident and defiant. He had clearly been coached on how to answer questions. Keep answers short. Don't volunteer information. Stay calm. But Sharon was too skilled for that strategy to work. "Officer Hartman, how many years have you worked in airport security?" Sharon began. 8 years, Hartman replied. And in those 8 years, how many complaints have been filed against you? Hartman's lawyer objected, but the judge overseeing the deposition allowed the question. I don't recall the exact number, Hartman said. Sharon slid a document across the table. Let me refresh your memory. 17 complaints. Does that sound accurate? Hartman barely glanced at the paper. If that's what the records say. Out of those 17 complaints, how many involved people of color? Another objection from Hartman's lawyer. Another ruling in Sharon's favor. I don't keep track of people's races, Hartman said, his tone defensive. You don't need to keep track, Sharon replied smoothly. The records do it for you. 14 out of 17 complaints were filed by people of color. That's over 80%. Do you think that's just a coincidence? I treat everyone the same, Hartman insisted. Sharon pulled out another document. Really? Because I have a statement here from a colleague of yours, Officer Benjamin Torres, who says you once told him that you, and I quote, keep a closer eye on certain types of passengers. What did you mean by certain types? Hartman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I don't remember saying that. Officer Torres remembers it very clearly, Sharon said. He remembers it because it made him uncomfortable enough that he reported it to his supervisor. And do you know what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The deposition went on for hours. Sharon methodically went through every complaint, every incident, every red flag that had been ignored. She asked Hartman about the psychological evaluation that recommended additional training. She asked about the settlements the airport had paid out. She asked about the day he assaulted Maya. When they got to that day, Hartman's story started to fall apart. You say Ms. Richardson was acting suspiciously, Sharon said. Can you describe what was suspicious about her behavior? She was nervous, Hartman replied. Nervous how? She just seemed on edge. Sharon played the surveillance video on a laptop, pausing it at the moment Maya first entered the security area. Can you point out in this video where she appears nervous? Because what I see is a woman walking calmly, placing her belongings in bins, and proceeding through the metal detector in a completely normal fashion. Hartman stared at the screen, saying nothing. You also stated in your report that Ms. Richardson failed to comply with your requests, Sharon continued, but the video shows her presenting her identification, her FAA badge, and her federal credentials. She answered your questions. She didn't resist. So where exactly was the non-compliance? She had an attitude, Hartman finally said, and even his own lawyer winced at those words. An attitude, Sharon repeated slowly. Can you define what you mean by that? She was talking back to me. Talking back? Or exercising her right to ask why she was being detained when she had done nothing wrong. The deposition ended with Hartman looking exhausted and defeated. Sharon had gotten him to contradict himself multiple times, and to admit that his report contained exaggerations and assumptions rather than facts. But Sharon wasn't done. She also deposed Hartman's supervisor, the man who had witnessed the assault and then defended it in an email. His deposition was even more damaging. You saw Officer Hartman grab Ms. Richardson? Sharon asked. I saw him detaining a passenger, the supervisor replied carefully. Did the manner in which he detained her concern you at all? Officer Hartman was following protocol. Sharon pulled out the airport's own training manual. Can you show me in this protocol manual where it says officers should slam cooperative passengers against walls? The supervisor couldn't answer. Can you show me where it says officers should ignore federal credentials? Silence. Can you show me where it says officers should handcuff people who haven't committed any crime and leave them in detention for 2 hours without explanation? The supervisor's lawyer called for a break. Meanwhile, the FAA's investigation had concluded and their findings were made public. The report stated clearly that Maya had been conducting official federal business, that she had proper authorization to be in the restricted areas, and that the treatment she received was not only inappropriate, but potentially criminal. The report recommended that the airport authority review all of Hartman's past detentions and consider whether other travelers had been similarly mistreated. The Department of Justice also weighed in. They announced that they were opening a civil rights investigation into the airport's security practices. This was huge. It meant that the federal government was taking the case seriously, and that there could be criminal charges in addition to the civil lawsuit. The public pressure was becoming unbearable for the airport authority. Protests outside the airport had grown larger and more frequent. Several civil rights organizations had joined together to organize a boycott. encouraging travelers to use other airports when possible. Airlines were getting nervous about the negative publicity. The airport's board of directors called an emergency meeting. They knew they were facing a disaster. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The videos had been seen by millions. The paper trail of ignored complaints made them look negligent at best and complicit at worst. And now they had federal agencies investigating them. Their expensive lawyers delivered the bad news. They were going to lose at trial. The evidence was too strong, the public opinion too negative, and the judge too unsympathetic to their arguments. If this case went to a jury, the jury would side with Maya, and the damages could be even higher than the $15 million she was asking for. It was time to talk about a settlement. Sharon received the call on a Wednesday afternoon. The defense wanted to negotiate. She immediately called Maya. They want to settle, Sharon told her. That means they know they're going to lose. What do we do? Maya asked. We negotiate, Sharon replied. But here's the thing, Maya. We can push for the full $15 million and probably get it. But we can also push for something more. We can demand changes, real changes to how that airport operates. We can make sure this never happens to anyone else. Maya didn't hesitate. I want both. I want them to pay for what they did, and I want them to fix the system that allowed it to happen. Then that's exactly what we'll demand, Sharon said with a smile. The settlement negotiations were about to begin, and Maya was determined to walk away with more than just money. She wanted justice, accountability, and change. The settlement negotiations took place in a neutral conference room at a downtown hotel. On one side of the long table sat Maya and Sharon, along with 2 other attorneys from Sharon's firm. On the other side sat 5 lawyers representing the airport authority, the city, and the security company. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The lead defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Robert Chen, opened the discussion. We're here today to find a reasonable resolution to this matter. While we maintain that Officer Hartman acted within his authority, we recognize that this incident has been difficult for Ms. Richardson. Sharon didn't let that stand. Let's be clear about something from the start. Your client didn't act within his authority. He assaulted a federal employee who was conducting official business. He violated her civil rights, and he did it in front of dozens of witnesses with video evidence. We're not here to debate whether something wrong happened. We're here to discuss what you're going to do about it. The defense team exchanged uncomfortable glances. Robert cleared his throat. We're prepared to offer Ms. Richardson $2 million to settle this matter and avoid the expense and uncertainty of a trial. Maya felt her heart skip. $2 million was more money than she had ever imagined having. It would change her family's life. Her kids could go to any college they wanted. She and David could buy a bigger house. They could retire comfortably someday. But before she could say anything, Sharon responded. $2 million? You think you can make this go away for $2 million after what you put my client through? After years of letting Hartman terrorize passengers? After covering up complaint after complaint? No, we're not interested. Robert shifted in his seat. What number did you have in mind? $15 million, Sharon said firmly. The amount stated in our lawsuit, plus systemic reforms. Reforms? Robert asked, his eyebrows raising. This is a settlement negotiation, not a policy hearing. Then let me make this simple, Sharon replied. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. We want $12.5 million, and we want these reforms implemented within 6 months. She slid the document across the table. The defense attorneys huddled together, reading through Sharon's demands. Their expressions grew more troubled with each item they read. The reforms included mandatory implicit bias training for all security personnel, not just a one-time seminar, but ongoing quarterly training. They wanted an independent civilian oversight board created to review all security complaints. They wanted complaint data to be made public so people could see patterns of behavior. They wanted the airport to commit to hiring and promoting more diverse security staff. And they wanted Officer Hartman fired immediately, with a guarantee that he would never work in security again. These demands are extensive, Robert said slowly. Some of them would require board approval, budget allocations, and significant operational changes. Then you'd better get started, Sharon replied. Because if we go to trial and win, and we will win, a judge might order even more extensive changes. Plus, the jury award could be higher than $15 million. Juries don't like it when institutions protect abusers. The negotiations continued for 3 more days. The defense team kept trying to reduce the financial payment and eliminate the reform requirements. Sharon refused to budge on the major points, though she did agree to some modifications in the timeline for implementing certain changes. Maya sat through every session, listening to lawyers argue over her life and her pain like it was just business. It was exhausting and emotionally draining. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought about Rita, the nurse who had been detained for hours. She thought about Carlos, the teacher whose laptop had been destroyed. She thought about all the other people who had suffered and had no voice. Finally, on the 4th day of negotiations, the defense team came back with a final offer. $12.5 million. Officer Hartman would be terminated immediately and would forfeit any severance or benefits. The airport would implement all the requested reforms within 9 months instead of 6. An independent audit would be conducted yearly to ensure compliance, and the airport authority would issue a public apology to Maya. Sharon looked at Maya. "It's your decision," she said quietly. Maya took a deep breath. It wasn't everything they had asked for. The timeline was longer than she wanted. But it was real change. It was accountability. It was justice. "I accept," Maya said. The settlement was announced at a press conference 2 weeks later. Maya stood at a podium outside the federal courthouse, the same place where the lawsuit had been filed months earlier. Sharon stood beside her, and behind them was a group of supporters, civil rights activists, and some of the other people who had filed complaints against Hartman. "Today, we reached a settlement that I hope will prevent what happened to me from happening to anyone else," Maya said to the cameras and reporters. This was never just about money. It was about changing a system that allowed abuse to continue unchecked. It was about making sure that Officer Hartman could never hurt another person. And it was about sending a message that discrimination and violence have no place in our airports or anywhere else. She paused, gathering her emotions. "I want to thank everyone who supported me through this difficult time. My family, my colleagues at the FAA, Attorney Sharon Davis and her team, and all the people who spoke up and shared their own stories. This victory belongs to all of us." The questions from reporters came quickly. What would she do with the settlement money? How did she feel about Hartman being fired? Did she think the reforms would actually be implemented? Maya answered each question thoughtfully. She said she would use some of the money to establish a foundation to help other victims of discrimination afford legal representation. She said she felt relief that Hartman could no longer abuse his authority. And she said she would personally monitor the airport's compliance with the reform requirements. The airport authority also held a press conference that day. The airport director, a woman named Patricia Morrison, stood at a podium looking uncomfortable and read from a prepared statement. "On behalf of the airport authority, I want to apologize to Maya Richardson for the treatment she received at our facility. What happened that day should never have occurred, and we take full responsibility for the failures that allowed it to happen. We are committed to implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure all travelers are treated with dignity and respect." It wasn't a perfect apology. It felt rehearsed and lawyered. But it was public and it was on the record. Officer Derek Hartman was fired that same day. He tried to appeal the termination, claiming he was being made a scapegoat, but his union refused to support him. The evidence against him was too overwhelming, and even his fellow officers didn't want to defend his actions. But the story didn't end there. 3 months after the settlement, criminal charges were filed against Hartman for assault and civil rights violations. The district attorney had been conducting a parallel investigation and concluded that Hartman's actions constituted criminal behavior, not just civil wrongs. Hartman eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He also lost his law enforcement certification permanently, meaning he could never work in any security or police capacity again. Meanwhile, the airport began implementing the required reforms. The first round of implicit bias training was conducted for all security personnel. The sessions were led by experts in psychology and civil rights, and they didn't sugarcoat the issues. Security officers were shown the videos of Maya's assault and asked to discuss what went wrong and how it could have been prevented. The Independent Civilian Oversight Board was established, with members selected from diverse community organizations. They had the power to review complaints, interview witnesses, and make binding recommendations for discipline. In the first 6 months, the board reviewed over 100 complaints and found merit in 37 of them, leading to disciplinary actions ranging from additional training to termination. The airport also began publishing quarterly reports on security complaints, broken down by type and demographic information. The transparency was eye-opening. It showed patterns that had been hidden for years, including the fact that travelers of color were disproportionately stopped for additional screening. Maya returned to work at the FAA 3 months after the settlement. Her colleagues welcomed her back with a standing ovation at their department meeting. Director Chen had worked hard to support her throughout the ordeal, and he made it clear that the FAA valued her courage and dedication. 6 months after the settlement, Maya was promoted to Regional Director of Safety Compliance. In her new role, she had the authority to develop training programs for aviation security personnel across the country. She used this position to implement many of the same reforms that had been required at the airport, but on a much larger scale. Maya also established the Richardson Foundation, using part of her settlement money. The foundation provided legal assistance and support to people who experienced discrimination in transportation settings. In its first year, the foundation helped 23 people file complaints or lawsuits against various airports, airlines, and transportation authorities. One evening, about a year after the incident, Maya was at home having dinner with David and their kids. Jasmine, now 11, asked her mother a question. "Mom, are you glad you fought back?" Even though it was so hard, Maya thought about the question carefully. She thought about the fear, the stress, the sleepless nights, and the emotional toll the case had taken on her and her family. But she also thought about the changes that had resulted, the people who had been helped, and the message that had been sent. "Yes, sweetheart," Maya finally answered. "I'm glad I fought back, because some things are worth fighting for. Justice is worth fighting for, dignity is worth fighting for, and making sure other people don't have to go through what I went through, that's definitely worth fighting for." Tyler, now 8, looked up from his plate. "You're a hero, Mom." Maya smiled and reached over to ruffle his hair. "I'm not a hero, baby. I'm just someone who refused to stay silent when something wrong happened, and that's something anyone can do." But to the hundreds of travelers who passed through that airport security checkpoint every day, experiencing the new training, the new oversight, and the new culture of respect that had been implemented, Maya Richardson was absolutely a hero. She was the woman who stood up, spoke out, and changed the system. And that legacy would last far longer than any settlement check ever could.